Everyone, good morning. I hope you can actually see me. Can you see me from where you are? Thank you so much for having me today. It's a tremendous honor for me to be back at Kinkaid. This place is incredibly special to me. And I thought I'd take a few minutes this morning to talk about the impact that Kinkaid has had on my life. Not so much about what I do professionally today, but actually in the years right after I left Kinkaid, when I went to college. Now, I'm sure it's obvious when you look at me, but I was a star athlete when I was in college. I promise, Division I. And despite what you're assuming, I did not play college basketball. Although Ms. Alsop probably remembers when I dominated the boards when I was here as a student. I did not play college lacrosse, though I actually did try out for the team until the coaches told me to stop playing because I was too intimidating. Football was not my game either. Unlike Dr. Martiri, who excelled on the football team at Princeton, thanks to his lightning-fast speed and his ballerina-like grace, I just didn't have those skills. Instead, as you heard this morning, my sport was rowing. And if you're scratching your head, wondering how a kid from Texas ended up on a national championship-winning rowing team, I have a story for you. And that story actually begins right here. I played a sport every semester that I was at Kinkaid, and I was terrible. I still have vivid memories of competing on the cross-country team. I'm sure my parents do as well. At one meet, I took so long to finish, they actually opened up the race course to traffic before I was able to cross the finish line. I'm pretty sure that's illegal, by the way. On the soccer team, I was the kid that they would send to retrieve the balls that had been kicked 100 feet out of bounds. I think my coaches took pity on me my senior year because they finally put me on the field in the game against St. John's. With chants of "Rudy, Rudy," singing in my ears, I scored 2 goals in those last 5 minutes. Unfortunately, both of them went into our own net. So, I was a terrible high school athlete. And to be honest with you, I definitely had moments when I felt sad or when I felt discouraged, because I didn't seem to be very good, and I didn't seem to be going anywhere. But I stuck with it, because I loved competition. And I loved being part of a team. And I loved working with others and contributing to something larger than just myself. Being the very last person to cross the finish line in a race and having cars chasing you down Westheimer will teach you to be humble. It will also teach you that there's more to life than always being number one. These were the lessons that my teachers and coaches and teammates taught me here at Kinkaid. Do your best. Give 100% effort. And if that isn't good enough, don't worry about it. Move on to the next challenge. But you owe it to yourself, and you owe it to the people who believe in you, people who have invested in you, people like your parents and your siblings and your family, to always put out a pure effort. And so when I went off to college, I went with a pretty clear sense of who I am. This school had taught me that there were certain things, like academics, that I was reasonably good at, so long as I applied myself. And there were other things, like sports, where I had no talent whatsoever. But this is the important lesson. I had learned not to avoid the things I was weak at. I had learned to pursue what I liked, and to derive real enjoyment and satisfaction from those activities, even if I wasn't the best, or the most talented, or the most successful. Anyone who goes to college in the Northeast will tell you that trying out for the rowing team is a rite of passage. You arrive in September, it's fall, the air is cool and crisp, the leaves are just starting to turn, and if you're near a river, you see these beautiful, picturesque scenes of boats moving down the river. Just like the other 800 boys in my freshman class, I went down to the boathouse to try out for the rowing team. When I arrived, the coaches took one look at me and said, "You're too small to row, but you could try out to be a coxswain. Would you be interested?" Now, I didn't know what a coxswain was, but I learned soon enough that a cox is the person who sits in the front of the boat and steers. He or she also wears a headset that's plugged into a microphone system on board, so that the cox can give the rowers commands about when to start rowing, when to stop rowing, and everything in between. During a race, the cox is like a coach in the boat, not only steering a straight line down the course, but also executing race strategy and motivating the rowers. Perhaps most importantly, the cox needs to be small, because he's basically dead weight in the boat. It's pretty ironic that in one of the most physically demanding sports on Earth, one of the key participants is someone who doesn't contribute physically at all. So you see where this is going. While I was slightly insulted that the coaches didn't give me the time of day as a rower, I knew I had found my calling as a coxswain. It was the perfect role for me. I could stay involved in team sports and pursue my love of competition without even having to break a sweat. In fact, my size was an advantage, so I was hooked from day one. There was just one problem. I had never done it before, and there were kids who showed up with me that first day who had done it before, and there were other kids who were already there because the coaches had recruited them to compete for that very purpose. This is where the lessons I learned at Kinkaid really kicked in. My first year in college, I coxed the 4th novice boat. We were terrible. We were so bad, we had to race local high schools. And about 5% of the time, we actually won. I wanted to be in the first freshman boat, traveling around the country, racing against the best crews from around the nation. But I had no business doing so. I didn't have the skills, and I didn't have the experience that some of the other kids had. So, just like my teachers here had taught me, I put my head down and I did the work. I wish I could tell you that that's all it took to succeed, but that wouldn't be the truth. That first year, I did work hard, but I was still pretty bad. One day in the spring, and my mom talked about this in that video, I took my crew out into Boston Harbor during practice. It was the first day the sailboats were back on the water after the winter freeze. And being a novice, I didn't know the rules of the river. When we came up on a sailboat, I thought it would yield. It did not. We crashed into it, and the bow of my boat actually snapped off. The boat started taking on water, and my rowers actually could have drowned. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. But I did have to look deeply into myself and ask why I kept dedicating 3-4 hours a day to something I clearly was not very good at. That process of self-analysis was important. Ultimately, after a lot of hard thinking, I realized for myself that I needed an outlet for my competitive nature, and that I really did enjoy spending time with my teammates on the water, figuring out ways to make our boat go faster. So I kept at it. By my sophomore year, I had moved up to the 3rd boat on the varsity team. The level of competition was still pretty iffy, but at least now I was on the travel squad, gaining the experience of representing my school in intercollegiate competition. My junior year, everything came together. The long hours spent out of the limelight just working on the craft of learning how to be a coxswain paid off. Things started to click. I had found my confidence, and the rowers and my coaches could tell. I ended up coxing the first varsity boat that year, and after a lot of hard work and a good bit of luck, my crew won the national championship. It's one of the greatest accomplishments of my life, and I was so proud to do it together with 8 of my closest friends. I still remember the advice our coach gave us in the weeks leading up to the national championship. A race covers 2,000 meters, and typically that takes over 200 strokes. So if you can go just 1 inch farther per stroke, you can cover the same overall distance faster by 4 or 5 seconds. Races at the collegiate level are often decided by tenths of a second, or even less. So you can see why every stroke counts, and why every inch matters. But you can't make those kind of adjustments on race day. You have to make them every day, in practice, over the course of a long season. That's what we would focus on, not on the race at the end of the year, but instead on going just 1 inch farther per stroke every single day. And that brings me back to one of the most important things I learned at Kinkaid. The quality of the education you get here is unmatched, and you should seize those opportunities. But in the long run, far more lasting than the specific details that you learn about in textbooks or in cramming for an exam are the habits and values that you develop at a school like this one. Attention to detail, respect, generosity for others, especially those who are less fortunate than you are, the importance of patience and preparation and perseverance. Go just 1 inch faster every day, and you will be pleasantly surprised by what you've accomplished at the end of the year. I'd like to close by quoting Stephen Hawking, the famous British scientist who died actually just a couple of weeks ago. I admire Stephen Hawking, and not only because he was a coxswain when he was in college too. I admire him because of the incredible example that he set. At age 21, Hawking began suffering from a debilitating disease. He spent the last several decades of his life paralyzed in a wheelchair, with his body progressively wasting away. Eventually, he lost the basic ability even to speak, even as his mind remained at the cutting edge of theoretical physics. So here was a person on Earth, was a prisoner in his own body, who nonetheless persevered and made path-breaking discoveries about the nature of the universe. One of those insights concerned black holes. For a long time, scientists believed that black holes were so dense, nothing could escape their gravitational pull. But Stephen Hawking realized that over very long stretches of time, black holes can actually leak tiny amounts of energy or light. And sometimes they can even evaporate away. As he once said, black holes aren't as black as they are painted. They are not the eternal prisons they were once thought to be. Things can get out of a black hole, both to the outside and possibly to another universe. So if you feel like you're in a black hole, don't give up. There's always a way out. I love those words, and I leave them with you. There are no eternal prisons. Never give up. Be persistent. Demand from yourself that you go just 1 inch faster every single day. It's great for me to be back here at Kinkaid. Thank you very much.